All right, shade. So, right, remember here, shade, surfaces, and air. So that's the general idea. So as we go through this regulation, when we talk about sort of cooling, it talks about shade. But let me ask you, are there other ways to cool people off other than just shade? Misting? Air-conditioned vehicle? Pardon? Cold towel, yeah. Moist towels are great. There's those kind of bandanas that stay cool for quite a while. You soak them in cool water and they stay cool. In fact, I think State Fund had given those away in years gone by. But there's a lot of ways to cool people off. Some employers have come up with little cooling kits. Okay? So if an employee starts to feel ill, they start to feel some of these symptoms of heat illness, maybe they're dizzy, a little bit nauseous, they have a headache, sort of initial symptoms. They can get them to some shade, but then they also have this little cooling kit with a spray bottle, cool moist towels. So there are other ways that aren't prescribed in this regulation, in addition to the shade, how you could cool people off, right? Okay, so think about cooling measures in general from a best practice standpoint, right? But this regulation that we go through here, it's going to talk just about shade. All right, so have and maintain one or more areas of shade at all times when employees are present. Okay, and that shade has to be up when the temperature exceeds 85. Okay, so does the shade need to be up today in Bakersfield? What's the predicted high temperature for Bakersfield today? 81? Okay, that's what I heard for Fresno too, was 81. Okay. What if the weatherman wasn't right? What if all of a sudden, 2 o'clock this afternoon, you're out there working and it's 86? Would the shade have to be up? Has to be up, right? Okay, so you still, even though the weatherman said it's going to be 81, the weatherman's not always right. So, you have to kind of keep your eye on that. So there's a couple ways of dealing with this above 85 degree trigger. And one way is to check the weather report. I think we all do that. We all have our smartphones or our laptops or at our computers. We listen to the news. We watch the TV. There are all these ways, right, to sort of follow the weather, and we do it. And so if you hear on the radio or on your news source, it's going to be over the 85, you can set the shade up at the beginning of the day, or your other option is to monitor the weather until it exceeds 85, and then that's your trigger, shade goes up, okay? So it's up to you how you want to deal with that, but the shade does have to be up if an inspector comes, temperature exceeds 85. Locate the shade as close as practical where employees are working. So, right, water as close as practical, shade as close as practical. Let me just mention as close as practical, right? What does that mean? What that means is if Cal OSHA inspector comes up and says, well, you put the shade at this particular spot, why didn't you put it, 20 yards over here closer to your employees? You better be able to defend yourself for what you're considering to be as close as practical. And there may be a good reason why you can't put it there. I know, for instance, in agriculture, there are some food safety laws that prevent, right, for the organic stuff, preventing containers being taken into the fields, okay? How close you can have a shade structure if there's no natural shade there adjacent. Natural shade structure, how close you can have it. So there are some of these issues, but you better be able to defend yourself for what's as close as practical for what your situation is, okay? Also regarding shade, there may be instances, and there has been when Cal OSHA has, inspected cases where people have gotten sick where, let's say I'm starting to feel heat illness, and I'm dizzy, I'm nauseous, I have a headache, and I just, boom, I plop myself down on the ground because I'm so dizzy, I'm thinking I'm going to fall over. So I'm sitting there, and someone recognizes that I have symptoms of heat illness, right? Okay. Now the shade structure, if this is, say, a row crop situation where there's no natural shade there, I can't get over to that shade structure because I can't walk. I'm already feeling too sick to be able to walk over there. Okay? So sometimes you're going to have to kind of think outside the box. You may have to get to that person to respond to them from a first aid standpoint. Okay? So a lot of people are actually keeping a large umbrella out there where there's no natural shade, and they would be able to respond to somebody who falls ill. Okay, that's an option. But you have to think about this. You may not be able to get that person to the shade. They may be so sick, so quick, that you have to respond to them, right? With trying to get them into the shade and trying to cool them down. All right, provide enough shade to accommodate at least 25% of the employees on the shift at any one time. However, retain the ability to permit access to all workers that request it. Okay, so at a minimum, start with, you need to kind of plan to have at least enough shade out there for 25% of the crew. But over and above, if more than that request to have the shade, then you're supposed to be able to provide that shade as well. Okay? Remember, access to shade must be permitted at all times. Okay, encourage employees to take a cool-down rest in the shade for a period of no less than 5 minutes. That's written right into the standard. Okay, the idea here is that if we take small breaks throughout the day, we kind of control this a little bit. Okay, this work factor. So the warmer it gets, right? If we're able to sort of work out a work rest regiment, right? A little more frequently as it gets really hot. Okay, we can really control that big plus on the work side. And if we look at sort of there's a group that has a recommended heat standard called the ACGIH, it's the American Conference of Governmental Industrial Hygienists, and they actually have a calculation that you do as the warmer it gets, the heavier the clothing you have on, all of these factors that can affect, right, your body core temperature going up, whether a person's been acclimatized or not, it actually calculates a work rest regimen for you. Okay? But, pardon me, the American Conference of Governmental Industrial Hygienists, it's a real simple little calculation, and it allows you to go through and actually calculate that. The military uses something very similar to that. Okay? They work in these very hot environments over in Afghanistan and Iraq. Question?
What was the acronym again?
ACGIH. Mm-hmm. Okay, so it's important that you encourage your employees to take these cool down breaks. Okay? Shaded area must not cause exposure to another health or safety hazard. Areas underneath mobile equipment. Okay, initially we had some people hanging out underneath trailers, okay, that could move, on wheels out there. So tractors or areas that require crouching in order to sit fully in the shade are not acceptable. This looks pretty comfortable, okay? Not only that, the ground underneath the pop-up, okay, can get pretty warm, especially depending on the angle of the sun. And that ground can be warm and can be a warm surface, all right? But here, right, in an orchard, that ground's been in the shade for most of the day, and that ground's pretty cool where that person's sitting. So you have to be careful when you plop somebody down if they're not feeling well. We don't want to heat them up, right? There's another one of those heat factors here with hot surfaces. But natural shade is okay, all right? Natural shade's okay, but you have to be able to assume a comfortable posture. Standard vineyards, traditional standard row vineyards, you're not going to, you'd only get enough shade there if the sun's at a really low angle. But a trellised vineyard, you should be able to comfortably sit underneath one of these new hire trellised vineyards. Citrus trees, typically you're not going to be able to crawl up underneath a citrus tree. They let them grow to the ground. There's a lot of dead wood under there. Okay, it's tough to crawl up underneath a citrus tree. But a lot of nut and stone fruit, you should be able to get in there if they're mature orchards and be able to find some shade. Now you can't, if you're working in an area where there is no natural shade and there's natural shade a mile down the road, you can't say, hey, our employees are going to walk that mile. That's not as close as practicable. You're going to have to come up with some other sort of solution that's nearby. Okay, if the temperature is below 85, right, doesn't exceed it, provide the shade access upon request, so people can request it even if it's not 85. In my experience, that doesn't happen very often. In situations where the employer can demonstrate that it is not safe or feasible to provide shade, an employer can utilize established procedures for providing shade upon request, or for non-agricultural employers, alternative cooling measures, right, that provide equivalent protection can be used. Okay, so what does this mean? This means, for instance, we had a situation experience over in the Salinas Valley. It gets really windy over there, especially in the afternoons. There was a pop-up set up over there, okay, and it wasn't staked down, and the pop-up became a kite, went into the overhead power lines, and part of the metal came down and actually hit a worker over there from the pop-up. So there are situations where shade structures can be more dangerous, right, by putting them up than coming up with some sort of alternative plan. And that's what we're saying here. Okay? We've got a picture over here of a little tent or shade structure. You may not be able to see it, but there's a trench there. And so we don't want people, say for instance, crawling down in an unshored or unprotected trench, right, to get in the shade. So, I mean, you've got to be practical here and kind of think about this. And if you are a non-agricultural employer, you do have that alternative to go to other cooling measures other than shade, as long as you can prove that it provides equal protection of shade. Normally we talk about around 15 degrees difference with shade versus out in the direct sunlight. When we say shade, what's the definition? What's Cal OSHA's definition of shade? Right, there's no shadow, right? You're not going to cast a shadow out there. Now, there are some groups that are trying to test some shade cloth like you'd use at a nursery. And the nice thing about the shade cloth is that it allows for air movement, okay? Because some of these structures don't allow for air movement. And right, we want that cooler air here, right? Be able to cool folks off. So I know the Nisi Farmers League up in Fresno, that group has actually been testing some different shade cloth material. So hopefully we'll see something come out of that, see if that is an acceptable alternative. They've been testing shade cloth against a pop-up